Hi, I'm Sequita Richardson. I am a family practice physician, and I'm so happy to be here today with Jennifer Reed. She is my first guest in a series talking about self-care. I am Dr. Missouri USA with Dr. World Productions, and my platform basically is talking about how women who are busy and professional need to care for themselves in order to be able to care for other people. So Jennifer Reed, I met her probably about 1 or 2 years ago. She is a fabulous nurse practitioner. I am always begging her to see my patients because she is so thorough. She is so thoughtful. She is actually board certified in both family practice as well as mental health. So I'm going to have Jennifer tell us a little bit more about what it means to be a family practice, a nurse practitioner, a little bit more about her specialty. And then she is going to share with us some tips and information about why mental health is important and why self-care is important in mental health.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. I am so grateful that you asked me to do this. It's such an important topic, and especially for women, I think this is very important to discuss. I am probably becoming more common in that there's nurse practitioners that work in family practice and are going back to school to get their second board certification. Because as you know, in family practice, so many of our patients present with mental health complaints, and really there isn't a lot of training in our programs to cover the amount of mental health complaints that we see now. When I worked in family practice, a third of all my patients presented for mental health complaints, and I honestly had no idea what to do. So I felt very helpless. So I decided to go back to school. And the first day that I was doing psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, someone asked me about a genetic test, and did I do it? And I said, what genetic test? I didn't even know what they were talking about. And then I fell onto this path where I learned about this amazing test for the brain that helps me to understand the underpinnings of anxiety and other mental health complaints. And that really has guided me in the last 3.5 years with what I do. It's extremely important to understand the causes of a problem. So when you asked me to talk today about mental health and self-care, I knew instantly what I wanted to talk about, because I talk about this with women every single day. And having been a working mother and I've worked now as a nurse for over 33 years. I get it, what it's like to have many things going on and trying to be good at one of them. And it's very difficult, especially if you care. So I'm going to talk about balance.
Perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen with you if that's okay.
Yes, wonderful.
Okay. So I read a book, and I don't read a lot of books because I work so much that I never ever get a chance. But I read a book that kind of changed my life. About 5 years ago, I heard a woman named Bridget Schulte. She's a Washington Post reporter discussing why your modern day woman is so miserable. And she was describing her own path where she had the great job, she had the kids, she had the husband in the house, but she felt ragged, overworked, and stressed. And so she ended up doing scientific research, interviewing sociologists and time researchers about how we actually spend our time, women, and our perceptions of how busy we are, and what happened that women became so completely overwhelmed. Well, it's a complex answer, but the simplicity of it is, when women really started going back into the work in 1950s, leaving the home, they really didn't give up the work from home. They are still do twice as much childbearing and twice as much work in the home, and still working full time outside of the home. So that code switching is difficult, and there really wasn't a equity dissemination of the work when that happened. So men didn't go, here, I'll babysit the baby. And some of them are amazing, don't get me wrong. But in general, women picked up an extra job and didn't give up the old one. So studies show that mothers that work outside the home do 2 times the housework and 2 times the childcare. When caring for children, women are more likely to multitask instead of spending time playing with children. So one of the big differences in general, again, there are one-offs, is that when I would babysit my child, I'd be doing the dishes, doing the laundry, making phone calls, planning the kids' homework for the next day. And men are more likely to actually enjoy caring for the children. You're actually going to play with them, spend time with them, and that's great.
Right,
But
yes.
women, we generally don't do that. At least I know I didn't, and this is what research shows. So I definitely fell right into that. Researchers from around the globe are showing the rising levels of role overload for women, and actually men are starting to feel the pressure. Okay, and that life is speeding up at a breakneck pace, and that many people cannot find an elusive moment of peace. And again, we talked about the 1950s, and then technology. Until they invented the clock, people didn't even know what time was. So the invention of the clock really set the pace to, okay, time is sensitive, you're wasting time. So, and then the phone did not do us any service. So everybody's checking their smartphone late at night, and that is making it difficult for us to turn off our brains and get that peace or unwind. 75% of mothers in the United States with school-age children work outside the home. And it's the same percentage in the Netherlands, but a lot smaller percentage of them actually work full time or even return to work within 6 months. And that's the big difference. Okay. So the other thing is mothers that work part time, and this surprised me, actually were more stressed out than those of us who work full time outside the home because of the role switching. So they're constantly going back and forth trying to juggle that. And that is actually harder than being able to have, 10, 12 hours to do the same job, like you and I might do in our career. Instead of, if I had to switch 4 times a day, it would be very, very difficult. But I do imagine this makes me think about, now that a lot of us are working from home with the current pandemic, how many of us are now role switching again? That we're not able to do our job uninterrupted because we have our children in the house. So we talked about the division of care. What's happening is the work hours and leisure time in America are dividing. Okay. So now 40% of American men and 20% of American women with a college education report putting in more than 50 hours a week on their job, as do 32% of professional single mothers. So what does this mean? So what I try to tell patients is there's this perception of women of what the busier we are, the more successful we are. So sometime in the 1980s, sociologists say that we looked up at the CEO female who looked perfect, had 5 perfectly dressed kids, was a size 2, and said that's what success is. But those people aren't happy. So what does that mean? It means that we have a distorted view of reality, right? So I can't really role switch the way that I think I can just because I think somebody else is doing it. So that peer socialization is really causing a problem. And so we all have this expectation we're supposed to be happy doing it, but it's from the moment we get up in the morning, it's not really a realistic thing. So what do we do about that? Well, the first thing we do is come to terms with the reality of that situation. What are the facts? Okay. And the people that study us every minute that we spend in the day are saying, you have more free time than you know, but there's this perception that we should be busy. So it's like a competition of who's busy, who's busier. And I'm guilty myself. I have found myself kvetching about how busy I am when I'm like, why am I, it's almost like I'm bragging, and I shouldn't be bragging about how busy I am. That's not a badge of courage. So what do? So I need to, first of all, look at the reality of my situation. I need to be a realist about it. And I need to decide what's my priority. I mean, obviously, I can't have a perfectly clean house, be great at what I do, make sure my kids are doing their homework. That isn't physically possible. So I have to decide what's my priority. And I have to be able to have long periods of time where I'm doing something so that I can get it done and be done with it instead of going back and forth all the time or never turning this off, which is really a problem for all of us. Okay. That somebody can reach us 24 hours a day. So, and studies show people are more productive that actually work that way. So am I more productive working 60 hours a week back and forth, or would I be more productive dedicating my time to one thing at a time? So I think the most important thing is the reality check. I think the second thing is to focus more on living in the now, the miracle of now. All right. So I don't have any control over what has happened in the past or into the future. I only really control the next 5 minutes. And so all anxiety comes from the past or the future, which I really don't possess. So I recommend that people focus on the next 5 minutes. I also recommend that when you start to feel stressed, or overwhelmed or you're role switching, a lot of people actually stop breathing. Have you ever noticed that when you're stressed out, you actually aren't breathing very deeply, which is your natural response to anxiety or feeling overwhelmed? So I
I
recommend,
noticed that like I don't breathe and my teeth clench.
yes, I actually think I've broken half my teeth in my life from clenching them at night from stress.
Mhm.
So the second thing I like to do is to breathe out. I find that instantly kind of takes the pressure out because it tells your body everything's okay, there's no danger. So that I think the out should be longer than the in. So breathing out longer than breathing in, it instantly helps me. So other recommendations. The front of the brain is your prefrontal cortex. And I want to talk about that for a minute. Can you see my screen still?
I can.
Okay. So that prefrontal is important for many things. It's the most important part of the brain. It's thinking, reasoning, planning, concentration, remembering, and self-control. So I call it, it's like the brakes for the emotional regulation. So as we're growing up, it is not very mature. So about the age of 19 or 20, and some people it's a little bit later. So our ability to control and regulate our emotion comes from those brakes in the prefrontal cortex. It also is what communicates to the fear part of the brain, which is the amygdala. Okay, your stress, emotional, frustration, all that, blood pressure, everything, executive functioning is all controlled by that front of the brain. And chronic stress, and I think of women and men too now more often than not, actually has been shown to shrink the gray matter in this part of the brain. And that is horrifying to me.
Yes.
Me not addressing chronic stress, my patients not addressing chronic stress will actually have a permanent effect on their ability to do these things. So it doesn't make any sense if you're playing the long game not to address these problems. We can't keep running this race without it doing harm to every part of our body. Okay. But this affects everything that we do. So I talked about the 5 minutes. I talked about the breathing out, actively removing the notion that you must be busy to be a successful person. Honestly, let's really think about that. How many of us are guilty of that? Right? And do we judge others who aren't busy? Like, well, I guess, which is ridiculous. All right. Prioritizing our lives, deciding what really matters to us the most. And then if all of this, if you really need a reality check, you could do a time journal, like was this book that I'm recommending. This is what they recommend. And that's really write down what you do all day to get an idea of what you're doing and how many times are you going back and forth, and is this really bringing you joy? Okay. And so we talked about the breathing out, modeling behavior. So research shows that we do more to affect others in a positive way by showing them how to behave than preaching or teaching. So I will do more by demonstrating this for people than I will for telling them how to do it. So the most important thing we can do is do this for ourselves. If you want to help everybody else, you have to demonstrate it
Yes.
for everybody in your environment. Okay. So become the role model for those around you. And that is the best I can do in 5 minutes.
And I think you did perfect. And
Thank you.
actually, one reason why I actually chose this subject matter, because I'm not very good at it. And so I thought that if I try to find a way or a means to teach people about it, that I would learn to do it and could also show and tell other people how to do it as well. Does that make sense?
It does.